Hey guys, and welcome to the Gumboot garden. Today I wanted to chat with you about pollination and how all of our garden goods are getting pollinated. So pollination is when the pollen on the anthers of a flower are transferred to the stigma of either within the same flower or between two flowers. And there's a couple different ways that this can happen. It can either happen through self-pollination or cross-pollination. And we're gonna talk about both. So when we're talking about self-pollination, we're talking about just one single plant, and it can happen in a couple different ways. So if we're looking at autonomy, that means that we're dealing with one flower on one plant. So within that one flower, you have both your male and female organs, so it can actually self-pollinate within that one flower. And the type of plants that have that type of flower would be things like your tomatoes, your peppers, beans, peas, ground cherries, and even blueberries. Now, I know a lot of you may have heard blueberries do well when there are multiple varieties of blueberries that you have because you get that genetic diversity and they can cross-pollinate to create a larger, better crop. But blueberries themselves can self-pollinate. So if you do only have one blueberry plant, you will get some blueberries. It might not just be the best harvest that you've ever had. But one interesting fact that I was able to find about these autonomatic, not sure if that's a word, flowers, is that when you have that flower, and a lot of them, you have your anthers, which might be up here, and the stigma might be a little bit lower. So your anthers up here with the pollen are above the actual stigma. So when your honeybees land on those anthers, they're not exactly the best pollinators to get that pollen into the stigma because they land and they just land on the anthers and no pollen is able to kind of hit the stigmas. However, bumblebees do a fantastic job of pollinating those types of flowers because when they land on the anthers, they vibrate their flight muscles, and which causes the pollen to break free from the anthers and fall down in to the stigma, pollinating our flowers, and that's how we get more crops. A lot of farmers will actually release bumblebees into their fields to help pollinate all of their crops, which I thought was really interesting because I know in my garden we do have honeybees, but we primarily have bumblebees, and I'm having a whole new appreciation for them now. The other type of self-pollinating plants are through geitonogamy, and that is when on one plant still we're doing the pollinating, but there are two different types of flowers. You have your male flower and you have your female flower, which is a little bit trickier to pollinate these because the actual pollen from your male flower has to make it to a completely different flower, make it into the female flower in order to get the fruit that we're looking for our harvest. Now, this can be done in a couple different ways. So the wind might carry the pollen. There's plenty of insects that could carry the pollen, or sometimes we even do that self-pollinating ourselves. But either way, it needs to make that transfer in order to get the fruit. And the different types of plants that are like this are your like summer and winter squash, your melons, your cucumbers, and then a lot of fruit trees like your nectarines, peaches, and apricots. Okay, so that's self-pollination, but there's also cross-pollination, and this is when you need two separate plants in order to bear fruit. Now, this oftentimes happens because you might have one plant that only produces male flowers and another plant that only produces female flowers. So we need to actually make that transfer from plant to plant through your insects and your wind and things like that again in order to bear fruit. And we see this primarily in our fruit trees, like our apples, our plums, and our pear trees, and I think avocados as well, that you need both a male and a female tree in order to get your fruit for the season. Now, there is one other plant that I know of that does need multiple plants in order to pollinate, and that would be your tomatillo. And that's because even though our tomatillos, the flowers have both the male and the female parts, they're self-incompatible. So even though they have both the parts, they can't produce fruit just on their own. They need another plant to kind of cross-pollinate with. However, just because these are the plants that need to cross-pollinate doesn't mean that they're the only ones that are cross-pollinating. Now, if you have the same type of plants or different varieties of the same type of plant within a small proximity, something like your home garden, then there's a really great chance that those different varieties and those different plants are going to be cross-pollinated with each other. Now, it doesn't affect the fruit that you're going to see this season or that season, but it comes when you are saving your seeds. So when you save your seeds that have been cross-pollinated between plants, then your fruit might look a little bit different. So it's not going to be the true plant that you had thought you were planting, but you are going to get a cross-pollinated plant that is a mix between the two plants that were involved in the pollinating. So if you have a Dr. Witchy and a Roma tomato and they cross-pollinate and you save that Dr. Witchy's tomato thinking you're going to get a big orange slicer tomato, that following year, when you grow those seeds, you might end up with something that is red. You might end up with something that's not as large and maybe not as nice. So it might not be as appealing as you wanted it to be. It might not be as tasty as you wanted it to be. However, there are some benefits to this. So long as you're saving seeds from those big, beautiful fruits off of a plant that is strong and healthy, then the chances are the new plant that you're going to grow, even though it's cross-pollinated, is going to survive and deal better with any of the difficulties that your little microclimate in your garden might face. So that might be an ultimately stronger plant. It's just that, the product that you get from it might not be as good. And this type of cross-pollinating can happen between so many different crops, almost any crop really. So you can see this a lot with your tomatoes, your cucumbers, your peppers. If you plant hot and sweet peppers close to each other and save some of the seeds from your hot pepper, hoping that you'll have hot peppers the following year, they might not actually be as hot. You might end up with a sweet pepper. So just some of the things that you need to think about when you are saving seeds, but it's not going to affect you in this growing season. You'll still get the fruit that you want, even if your plants are cross-pollinating. But that's it for our pollination chat today. Just keep that in mind when you're out and planting your plants, whether you're saving seeds, you might want to cover up those flowers before the insects are pollinating and cross-pollinating them. You might need to make sure that you have, multiple fruit trees or multiple tomatillos, but I will catch you in tomorrow's video, guys. Good luck growing, and I'll see you later.